everybody is going to die. It's absolutely the commonest of human experiences. Not everybody has a baby, for example, not everybody gets married, for example, but everybody is touched by death. And yet it's probably the only conversation that we rarely have.
The average person is scared of dying, and I think of course we are, because we don't know. It's the only fact of our life, but it's the one thing we don't know about.
Are you ready for something that you can't plan? That's the question.
The thing that I'm nervous about is generalising and making it sound like everything's the same. Every death is very different. But there some familiar things happen.
It's very difficult to say to a relative. They will always say to us, how long have I got, doctor? The reality is you don't know, and you don't often know until about the last 48 hours.
But very often, and I don't know why it happens, there might be a period of lucidity, maybe a day or 2 days before someone dies. It's as if they come back for a moment and can have conversations, and there's almost as if there's a gift to the family, or I've seen it happen so many times. And also what often happens just before the moment of death is that people's eyes open, and they've been quite a sort of seemingly, and that's often a signal for me anyway, oh, something's about to happen here.
Usually the process of actual dying is very calm and quiet. It is literally breathing your last. So a normal breath, longer periods of gaps between breaths until there are no more breaths. And that's probably 90% of the people that we see die. That's the way they die, and it's a very calm and quiet experience, and it's one that families can often stay with because it's comfortable.
I'd been to see, no, I'd only met this lady once. I was in her, she was dying at home, and she'd had Marie Curie nurses, I think for maybe a week or something, and she'd been in a kind of suspended state, and I looked through her notes. There was no change at all, and she was just seemingly unconscious. And her daughter had just arrived from abroad, and we were just talking quietly across this lady who was lying very peacefully, actually. And she asked me about myself and my life, and I said that I was a midwife, and I sort of think birth and death are very similar, and we were chatting about that, and she said, oh, well, what's the similarity then? And I said, well, they're both about letting go, really, just about surrender, because it's almost as though you can do nothing else in those situations, and it's easier if we can completely let go. And we continued chatting, and within 5 minutes, this little lady, her breathing started to change. It was extraordinary, just very, and I realised in that moment, oh, she's heard me and she's understood what I've said. And so I talked her through it, and I said, it's okay, it's really fine, that's all you have to do. Just let go. You don't need to do anything else, just let go. And her daughter talked to her, we talked to her, and within 5 minutes she died. So it was like, oh wow. So sometimes people need to have an instruction because we don't know what to do.
Some of the more common things that I hear from families are, we were at hospital with Great Aunt Martha every hour of every day for 2 weeks. And for whatever reason, we all went out to get a cup of coffee, and by the time we came back, she was dead.
And they choose their moments when everybody's out of the room and all of that kind of. The family are terribly distressed because they weren't there, but actually that's absolutely fine. That's what was needed, and that's how they could let go.
I'm not saying that Great Aunt Martha made a conscious choice. But you know, sometimes people just need to be left alone. They don't need to have people pandering and talking and rubbing and doing, and you know, sometimes people just need to be quiet and calm and just let it happen.
Let me see. So it's probably actually easier if I tell the story because it's something familiar. So let me see. The first inkling. Not really inkling, but the first incident related to her death that I can recall was I think it was in September of 2004. And we were all together, actually, all the 4 brothers and sisters, we were together. And she told us about the dream she'd had that night, where she'd been on this beautiful beach, it's like heavenly beach, and walking on this beach, and then all of a sudden this big wave came and just took her away. This huge wave came and took her away, and just like that. And she said, "Oh," and I thought, wow, what an amazing way to die, don't you think, darling? And we were all like, yeah, laughing, yeah, you know, hugely symbolic dream, you know, what does that mean? But we all remembered it because afterwards, when I recalled that dream, which was sometime after she died, I said, did she have that dream or not? And I asked them all, and they went, yes, she did. And so, you know, it had really happened. And but you know, you wouldn't sort of think that was premonitory, because why would a big wave come and take one away? I mean, it's, you know, larger than life kind of thing.
I have on my computer a file marked Dead Frank. My wife knows it's there, my son knows it's there, and they have copies of it. And periodically I update it, but it's a list of, you know, it's just, okay, when I die, this is who you need to contact. They'll take care of you. Do I want a church service? Do I want hymn sung? These are the kinds of things that I'd like to have happen.
I suppose the best deaths, if you like, I don't know whether that's the right thing, is where everything's in order. And I think a lot of it's down to the person. And it's not necessarily those that have got a strong faith, or it's just about being at ease with yourself.
Also, making the kinds of provisions that need to be made for the people who are left. And that's about making wills, that's about writing letters to people, that's about making sure that people know that they are cared for and that they are loved, because whenever someone dies, the relatives have so many decisions to make.
I think good endings are particularly important. And I remember as a GP, I went to see a patient who I'd call in and see fairly regularly, and this was a man who'd been diagnosed as having terminal cancer. And he was a lovely chap, and I used to pop in and see him, and we had talks about all sorts of things, mostly about cricket, rugby, current affairs. He was a very bright man, and I used to have a cup of coffee with him and chocolate biscuit, and it was delightful. But it was very interesting that his wife stopped me one day when I was leaving the house and said to me, has he talked to you about dying? And I said, no. And she said, well, do you think you could talk to him about it? Because I'd like to be able to talk to him about it. And whenever I try and talk about it, he sort of closes me down. So this put me on the spot a bit, and next time I went, I sort of bit my lip and talked about it, and I said to him, you know, how do you feel about dying? And interestingly, he didn't have any major fears about his own death. And I asked him if he was happy to talk about it with his family, with his wife and his children. And he said, no, I'm not. No, I think I find that really difficult. And I said to him, well, why would that be? And he said, well, because I think they get upset. I just touched on how it must be for his wife not to be able to talk about it. And the interesting thing was that it had a very cathartic effect. And he engaged, and there was lots of tears and lots of distress. But he was also able to have a relationship with his children. And one of his sons wrote to me after he died, saying how those last few months of his life were the best months in terms of connecting with him that they had ever experienced.
I have experienced quite a few deaths in my life. I was born in the first year of the First World War, and my mother died in 1917 from that flu epidemic. I was almost 4, and I could make a film of that scene. My father came in and said, you have to say goodbye to your mommy now. And I said, goodbye, mommy. And then he took me out again, and there were all these people, and he was crying, and I was put on the sofa, and then they all disappeared to go to the funeral. And then I was left by myself, and all of a sudden the world was dark and cold and lonely, and that feeling of being all left to myself, and I knew there was somebody coming to look after me, and so the next following 3 or 4 years were really completely, there's nothing in my memory about that, apart from going to the cemetery every day with my dad to say hello to mommy.
If there's anything that's worrying patients, they're agitated, and quite often, if we can have that conversation, is there anything that you haven't told anyone? Is there anything that's worrying you? And sometimes we just never know, but there's obviously something.
Sometimes it's about relationships that have gone bad. Sometimes people carry with them guilt and are burdened by things that they did when they were much younger. Often there are infidelities.
Sometimes people hold back for all sorts of reasons. And so quite often I suggest that people in the family maybe talk to that person and say, it's okay to go, we're fine, we'll be fine.
I don't know what happens after people die, but I know that there are people who are afraid.
And a particular lady I know who believed absolutely she was going to purgatory because of her faith. And things had happened in her life that she thought she had to pay dearly for, really did not want to die. And that was true fear, and that felt uncomfortable to me because none of us could help her. Even the priest couldn't help her, even with, and I think that probably is the hardest thing I've witnessed.
Now, there are people, as I said before, who in anger, in frustration, in fear, thrash around and hang on and grab and pull and scream, and that does occur. It doesn't help them. They're going to die anyway, and it doesn't help the people who are around them.
Actually, anger is the common denominator. I don't know whether that's true in all difficult deaths, but in most of the difficult deaths I've been involved in, it's been anger that's been the difficulty. And this young man was not at all prepared to die. He just was furious. And you know the old poem, Rage and Rage Against the Dying of the Light. Well, he just raged, and he was so ill, and so, he could hardly stand, and he was very thin, very yellow, jaundiced, and he would be deeply unconscious. He would refuse all medication. So everything, he was fighting against everything.
Who do you get angry with when you know you're going to die? Well, sometimes people lash out at relatives because they're the closest thing to them. Other times people get really angry with God, and the expression, "why me?" always happens. And without being trite, why not you? I mean, sorry, with no disrespect to anyone, and I'm not trying to be flippant, and I'm not trying to excuse anything or anyone, but why not? Death happens. It doesn't happen sequentially. It doesn't happen chronologically. It doesn't happen pleasantly. People die in accidents. People die in hurricanes. People die in airplanes. People die. Anytime, anywhere. Why not you?
And for a wife, can you imagine? You don't want him to die, and yet, why don't you just get on with it? In the end, everyone so wanted him to die, and of course, for him and for themselves.
The next one was my father dying, and I was 19. And he had remarried in the meantime, and I had a very happy childhood after that, wonderful stepmother. And I remember going to the funeral with my stepmother, and as we were walking along, this was late August, beautiful sunshine, I looked at my mother, and she looked at me, and we were both smiling. And we said afterwards to each other, we had the feeling that our dad was around. And he was sort of watching all this, and he had a great sense of humor, and he couldn't stand pomp. And he always had said, "Don't make a fuss about me when I die." So we had this feeling, he was there. So that was a very different experience from the first one. There was something.
Yes.
One of the best predictors for developing severe or chronic pain is anxiety and depression. So one of the things that often happens is that you can neurosensitize. So if somebody's very, very frightened, or very, very distressed, or very, very depressed, they're going to feel much more pain, physical pain.
And so I think creating conditions in which somebody feels they're held in the right way, and that it's safe, and that even if they don't necessarily know what is going to happen, somebody has a confidence in the process.
I think we can be emotionally phobic, and we have an emotional phobia, and if we're emotionally phobic, that's almost contagious, and people then pick up what they can and can't talk about. An unfortunate example that was given to me when I was doing some teaching of junior doctors. And one junior doctor outlined how he'd been on a ward round with a senior surgeon, and the surgeon was explaining how he'd removed a breast lump from this woman, and he then went through the staging of the tumour and the treatment protocols and the radiotherapy and the chemotherapy. And while he was talking to the patient, a tear appeared in her eye and ran down her face. And then a few moments later, another tear appeared in the other eye and ran down her face. And he continued to outline the treatment protocol. And then he asked her if she'd got any questions, and she shook her head, and they all left the room. And one of the junior doctors said to the consultant, she seemed rather distressed. And he said, well, I think we'll probably leave that to Sister, don't you? And I think there was a sense that, you know, nurses were better at this, and I think actually nurses are fantastic at it. I think they do address the more emotional and spiritual needs of the patient. I think that's unfortunate, because I think it sends a message, and I think if we can all talk about emotional and psychological distress, it tends to normalise it, but it also tends to give permission to ventilate and to say how you feel. And if certain people, and doctors, you know, historically have a position of some authority, although that may be diminishing, if they're saying, you know, that isn't appropriate stuff to be addressing, then that sends a message. So it shuts people down, I think, and I think what we need to do is open people up rather than shut them down.
The sort of art of being with someone in that situation isn't really acknowledged as enough, I don't think. And I think this act of being with someone on their journey, whatever it may be, not trying to change it, even though it might be really difficult, not feeling that you have to jump in and save the situation, or somehow just accompanying them on this very mysterious process, very mysterious journey. For myself, I hold a sort of a quietness and a prayerfulness inside myself.
This has been described in death as amicus mortis, a friend in death. And I think someone who's with you when you're in distress, but also allows you to be distressed.
Well, somebody gave me a lovely quote once. We're not human beings who may have the odd spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings who happen to be having a human experience. And so that's the context that I hold all of this in, that actually we are spiritual beings, we're here on this earth, and that this is just one small aspect of our life in that bigger context.
She didn't go till about a week after I'd given birth, but a few days afterwards I was finding it quite difficult with my feeding and stuff, and she said, "Are you sure it's okay for me to go? You know, don't you need me? You know?" And I said, "No, Mum, it's fine. You know, you really need a rest. You go off and have a nice time, and then we'll see you in the new year." And it was almost like asking permission or something to go. Yeah, it's funny. Could you think, "Man, I should have said no, we can't go." But actually it was, you know, just totally what was meant to happen. Obviously, she called all of us up on the Christmas Day, I think it was a Saturday, in the morning. I thought, it's funny she's calling up. And apparently she called up my brother's house and he wasn't there, and he missed the call, and he had this panic. He's like, "I've really got to talk to her." I prayed that she would call back, and she did, and they spoke and everything. She called me, and I was really exhausted because I hadn't had much sleep, and had a short kind of conversation with her. You know, nothing really meaningful, but just, you know, touching base and you can attach a lot of meaning to the last conversation. It doesn't really matter. But it was funny that she called up. And then I think what happened over there was, that's right, there was a big party on the Christmas Day night, and most people drank a lot and slept in, but she and Reg didn't drink a lot, and they got up and went for a walk on the beach. So there was this, the waves were right out, and then basically all the fish were flipping on the sand, and my mum was just like going to pick them up and put them back in the water. She was like, oh, these poor fish, She's very typical of my mother, just to save anything, that was around. And she got stung by a ray, apparently. And Reg said, oh, are you okay? Can I help? Should we go back and everything? She said, oh, I'll be fine. You go back and I'll follow. And then he turned around, and then that's when it hit.
And the next one was, then I got married when I was 26, and that was we got married in July, and in October the Second World War started, 1938, and my husband was called up straight away. He was just the right age, and he was killed at the invasion in Russia. And we were very, very close. It was a very spiritual relationship. And I was aware of when it happened. And we had a little daughter. We celebrated her first birthday together. That was lovely. And then in in June it was, one afternoon I put her into her cot to go to sleep and bent down to kiss her, and suddenly I had this excruciating pain in my back, all over my back. And I knew it wasn't me. I knew it was Beth. And I thought, oh, this is it. And then a fortnight later I got the letter, and I looked at the postman and said, oh yes, I knew. And he stared at me.
Some of our patients' homes sometimes feel like Piccadilly Circus, because you already have the GP, the district nurse, the district nursing team. There'll be more than one of them on a rota of on-call over the week. There'll be all of our team. There might be an occupational therapist, there might be a physiotherapist, there might be all sorts of therapists, there might be social workers, there might be carers. And actually, what they really need is somebody who will be pivotal all the way through, that they have a name, that they knows them. They don't want to keep repeating their story. They want to have a continuity of seamless care for themselves. Anything else at that distressing time just increases the distress. And whilst I think in the bigger world we are beginning to see that that's what is needed, we're still not addressing that on a 24-hour basis. You don't die 9 to 5, Monday to Friday.
The vast majority of people, you can control their pain, and they should have access to good pain control. I think one of the difficulties is the funding of good terminal care, and a lot of it's supported by charitable work, and the NHS pays a fraction of it. And I think it's critically important to have good terminal care, both from a spiritual and emotional and psychological level, but also from a physical level.
And that's part of what the hospice movement is about, is to help people die with dignity and calmly, pain-free, without all of the trauma, the external trauma that can go on.
What I'd like to see at some point is that you almost set up sort of multidisciplinary think tanks where I can learn from priests, we can all learn from each other, because I think that it's not about that there's any one setup or any one answer, or actually any one question.
I would like death to be much more integrated into our ordinary life. You know, A, that we talk about it, B, that, death at home, I think, is probably on the increase, which is good. It becomes much more part of the life cycle, and younger people are more exposed to it. I think it's really healthy for children to be able to be around death and to have it explained, but so that this pattern of fear around it doesn't build up. I think fear is really the key issue around it, actually.
My brother and I mainly had we were the ones that shared it with each other anyway, quite a few very, very vivid dreams about her in the first year, and certainly some of them just felt so real. Like he had a dream that she came to him, and that was quite soon afterwards actually, in the first week, and asked him what had happened to her, because she didn't know what was going on. And he told her, apparently, she's wearing deep fuchsia pink, which is her colour, and apparently she found it quite amusing. Kind of shocked but kind of amused at what happened. And I met this woman, this good woman, in France on holiday, and she's a healer actually. She did this healing she does very, very, very rarely with anyone. And she said that my mum kind of came into the space, and but she had to leave because she's really quite busy. She was off. She was off on a kind of healing. I mean, this, it depends what she was off kind of, and she was needed, and she was healing. She was busy. She had a job to do. And I can really get that because my mum was always busy anyway, and she was always healing other people. And it's like, okay, she's just doing what she always did, but just on another dimension. And she had this vision of her going over the sea, and she didn't know this at my mother's death or anything, with all these other beings, and it was like, wow, she, exists this continuing of a role on some level. So I think this concept that we have of things just ending on all levels is, and more I think that is insane. That's just a point of view, but it doesn't make any sense. It does, of course, if you don't believe in spiritual life continuing, but it's energy, so energy doesn't just end, right? It continues in some form.
There has to be something more. I hear that a lot. The world is like this. There has to be something more. And there are days when I think, well, actually, there's a lot here, so why should there be more? And I think that's quite a healthy argument to have with yourself, that you've got to make the best of this, because who does know, really? We can believe what we really want to, and we can believe, yes, it's going to be lovely up there, and I'll meet my mum and my auntie and all the other people who've gone. But actually, how do we know that? We don't.
The first death I attended as a nurse, I was very young, I was 18 or 19, and I was very scared, really. I didn't actually attend this lady as she died, but I was asked to go to lay her out, as we did in those days, with another nurse, and I was a bit nervous. So as we were washing her, I started to giggle because I was so nervous, and I felt bad about it. I thought, oh dear, this is terrible. And then suddenly And I had I'd never read anything. I knew nothing about out-of-body experiences. I had no knowledge of anything spiritual. Suddenly I knew that this lady was in the top left-hand corner of the room, top right-hand corner of the room. And I knew she was there, and I knew she was cross, that I was laughing. So, I mean, it was such a peculiar experience. It was like, what, how couldn't she be up there? But it felt now, with many years retrospect, I think it was a kind of a real gift to me, because even though I had no context for it, I had no understanding of what that was, it suddenly made me think, oh gosh, well, maybe she was really witnessing this.
I did believe at one death that I did see the spirit leaving. I didn't know whether I ever believed in seeing the spirit leaving, but there was more than just me there who witnessed that. And it didn't scare me. I didn't think, oh, I can't tell it. I did think, I can't tell anyone I've seen this because they're going to think I'm mad. But the other nurse sort of said to me, did you see what I thought I saw? And I said, well, yes, and wasn't it lovely? It was a lovely sunny day, the windows were open and everything lifted out, blew the curtains out, and it was just lovely. What I witnessed was like white smoke, maybe, a very light, fine mist. It wasn't a person, it was an entity, I suppose. No one was distressed, no one moved. It was it was a family that were highly intelligent. It wasn't, there is an element of what I call weirdness of some people, that you go in and you think, well, anything could happen in here, because there is an element of that already. But this was not like that. This was a very basic, normal, sensible family, and a very calm and nice, pleasant death. And it just seemed a natural conclusion to see her go where she had to go.
When my own mum was dying, my father came to collect her, my father who is dead. And so my mum had no spiritual belief whatsoever. And I just said to her, Mum, is Dad around? Just wanted to be curious. And she was just able to talk. She said, oh, he keeps passing by. So I thought, well, that's pretty wonderful. She's seeing him. Presumably he's coming to take her on her journey, and that felt tremendously comforting, really, to know that. And I've heard many other people say that that's what happens, that, people who've had near-death experiences often have the experience of someone that they've loved who's already dead coming to talk to them, to bring them home. So.
This one daughter of mine, we were very, very close. Of course, I brought her up by myself. We were always together. And then, Christmas before last, she was diagnosed with cancer of the pancreas. It was inoperable. It was much too late. And she died on the 26th of May last year. And that's why I'm here. And what's happening to our whole family is amazing, how they are so blessed, how life is getting better and better for them, how they feel more strength and energy. And she's always said to them, if I die, don't worry about that, because I'll be much more able to help you from there than I'm here. And this is what's happening. And the most wonderful thing is, for me, that for the first time ever in my life, I had a dream about my husband. And I suddenly realized that something had changed for him. She's actually been in touch with them, and they are together now. And the same with her husband. She's taken all of them with her. And it's absolutely wonderful.
I do, on one level, think there's an element of choice. There can be there's an element of choice in the way you die. Or you can exert that choice on some level, whether it's subconscious or... and that for me that would be a good death. I mean, you wouldn't think it that, you know, dying in a tsunami would mean that anyone had been given a choice to die that way, but given the the kind of what led up to my mum's death, for me there were some obvious connections. She completed a lot in the months before she died. So she brought over, for example, her very close brother in Iran, who they'd been meaning to get him over for years. She got him over from Iran and they had a couple of weeks together, and she took him around to the museums. He's an artist that always wanted to see the museums and exhibitions, and then she had two family parties in 1 week with like all of the members of her family who never normally get together, you know, bring everyone together. It was like, I think I only went to one. I was just, you know, I was very, very pregnant, so I was like, only 2 in 1 week, you know, all these people coming. And, you know, there was a long-standing dispute with an uncle, and that was kind of made up, and she resolved things with various, and I heard of all these different, she'd had this common thing with different friends of hers that she'd had, you know, made problems with, and it had been kind of forgiven. I mean, she actually did all this work. So she did the work anyway, without consciously knowing she was leaving. Yeah. It was funny, you know, just there was just this element of resolution. So they do say people do that before they leave.
Whatever happens next will happen in God's care. And at some point, we have to put our trust somewhere. We have to put our faith somewhere. That doesn't mean you're not still afraid, but it means that you can deal with the fear that you have and turn it over. Now, I can say that because I've never died. It's easy for me.
If we're really prepared and reconciled or to the best of our ability, it means that we live life in a completely different way. We're not sort of fearful of death, therefore we tend to not be so fearful of life. So, you know, they're not separate from each other.
Whatever God gives and how one dies, it's not anything we should worry about. It's just to accept it. And once we accept everything that's given, it makes everything easy. It just flows along. Because you're in the middle of the river of life.